What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 and the Cricket Icon 4. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Play, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Cricket Icon 4, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution as well, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in pretty much every way, these displays are basically exactly the same. The only real difference is that with the Moto G Play, we are getting that 90Hz refresh rate, which is going to make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother, but honestly, in real life, sure, it's going to make the phone feel a bit more premium to use, but being an entry-level phone, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. So in general, both displays are pretty normal for entry-level devices. But that being said though, despite not really having much of a difference, they definitely aren't bad displays. And for the average user, for more basic activities like web browsing, light social media use, and watching the occasional video every now and then, they will definitely get the job done just fine. Now, both phones are getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. And honestly, this is definitely a downfall of phones like this, because while pretty much every phone in this price range is going to have the same amount of storage, I feel like at this point in 2023, it's just really not enough. With stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, sure, you can offload some stuff onto a microSD card, but if you're constantly downloading all kinds of apps and games and stuff like that, with these phones you are going to run out of space pretty quickly. So if that is you, you're definitely going to want to get something with more storage. But of course, if you're a really light user and you have like 5 apps and not a whole lot else, then I guess you will at least be okay. For security features, both phones here do have fingerprint scanners, so definitely nice. And then with the Cricket Icon 4, this phone also has Face Unlock, whereas unfortunately, the Moto G Play doesn't. But starting with the Moto G Play, let's give the fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Cricket Icon 4. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, keep in mind, the Cricket Icon 4 does have Face Unlock too, so with this phone you do have the option to use that instead, whereas unfortunately with the Moto G Play, again, this phone does not have Face Unlock. Now, taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Moto G Play, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Cricket Icon 4, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is also 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a single camera, and this camera is 13 megapixels. So in general, when it comes to features, clearly here, the Moto G Play does have a bit of an advantage, having a depth sensing camera, so although portrait mode technically does work with the Cricket Icon 4, it is going to be a bit better with the Moto G Play. And then of course it also has a macro camera too, so you can get those close-up detailed images. So if you want a few more camera features, then the Moto G Play will have an advantage here. And in addition to this, aside from the camera features, I feel like the photo quality with the Moto G Play is a bit better. Sure, considering these are really low-end devices, neither phone is going to have amazing photo quality, and the Cricket Icon 4 is also not terrible. But if you do want the better camera between the two, then in pretty much every way, the Moto G Play will have an advantage. Now, to give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Play. Overall, for what it is, I do think they came out pretty nice. Sure, they're not going to be amazing studio quality photos, but obviously if you spend more money, you will get a better camera. That's just how it works. But if you are looking for a more affordable device that has a decent camera for more normal everyday activities, the Moto G Play is going to be perfectly fine. I mean, I doubt someone's going to look at one of these pictures and assume it was taken from a low quality camera. So in general, if you want to post a couple pictures on Instagram here and there, send something to friends and family, or maybe use Snapchat, overall the Moto G Play will definitely get the job done. And then here's some pictures taken with the Cricket Icon 4. Again, pretty much the same kind of thing. These phones are really in the same ballpark, honestly. If you're just taking regular photos, if you don't really care about having a macro camera, then camera-wise, these phones are pretty much interchangeable. I mean, the Cricket Icon 4, again, is still going to be perfectly fine. I have seen much worse cameras than this. So in general, on one hand, if you really want a super good camera, you're obviously going to want to spend a bit more and get a higher-end device in general. But again, for the basic essentials, I do think either camera is going to be perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Play, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. With the Cricket Icon 4, this phone also has 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A22. In general, when it comes to overall performance, keep in mind, neither of these phones are very fast. In fact, even for entry-level phones, these two are honestly towards the bottom. So if you are going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing more demanding activities, you will probably notice they are pretty slow, and you will probably want to get something faster. That being said though, if you are getting something for more of the bare minimum, and you're really just not going going to be on your phone a lot. Maybe you're doing some light web browsing and social media, watching videos every now and then, and otherwise just using your phone as a phone. Then in that case, either phone will at least get the job done. And again, between the two, there's not really a huge performance difference. Now I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see here, definitely not really much of a difference. So I really wouldn't use performance as a deciding factor between the two. And another thing I do want to point out here is that at this point in 2023, sure, these are really cheap entry-level devices, but honestly, even then, there are plenty of phones that are much faster, that are just as inexpensive. I mean, on Cricket, there are plenty of deals for things like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, or the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G. The list really goes on. There are plenty of other phones that are a lot faster than either of these, but are really not that much more expensive. So the point here is, if performance is really that important to you, I would just get a completely different phone altogether. But again, if you are looking for something really basic and you don't really care that much about performance, then for what they are, either phone will at least get the job done. For the batteries, with the Moto G Play, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging, and with the Cricket Icon 4, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that also supports 10 watt fast charging. So clearly here between the two, the Moto G Play does have a significant advantage. So if battery life is more of a priority for you, then definitely keep this in mind. That being said though, I do want to point out that with the Cricket Icon 4, in my experience, the battery life isn't terrible. And sure, it's definitely not the best, but if you just need a decent battery that works, it still should be perfectly fine. But again, of course, if you want the best battery life and longevity between the two, then obviously the Moto G Play with the 5000 mAh battery will still be a much better choice. When it comes to the software, both phones currently have Android 12, so not the best, but considering that most phones in this price range besides Samsung's all still have Android 12 for whatever reason, despite us being in 2023, I guess it's not really that bad. But also keep in mind, between the two, I'm guessing that the Moto G Play is eventually going to get an update to Android 13, whereas with the Cricket Icon 4, I doubt it will. So if you want the update eventually, then I would go with the Moto G Play. But keep in mind, I have no idea when or if this is actually going to happen. So if you really cared that much about the software, then I would recommend going with something like a Samsung instead. But again, at this point in 2023, as of this recording, it could change by the time you're watching this, but right now in March, I haven't seen very many entry-level phones that have Android 13, and actually the only ones I've seen that do have it are Samsung Galaxy A series phones. So while it definitely would have been really nice to see at least the Moto G Play 2023, since after all it does have 2023 in the name, having Android 13, both of these phones having Android 12 is really not that surprising. As far as other features go, with the Cricket Icon 4, keep in mind, this phone does have NFC, whereas unfortunately but not surprisingly, the Moto G Play doesn't. So if you like to use tap and pay, you are going to want to go with the Cricket Icon 4. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in honestly almost every way, these phones are pretty much the same. So if you're looking for a super affordable entry-level device for more basic activities, you don't need any fancy features or great performance or anything like that, then in that case, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone because overall for what they are, surprisingly, I do think both devices are actually pretty good. That being said though, if you want a larger battery, a better camera, a higher refresh rate I guess, although I feel like no one really cares about that part, and you want a better chance of being able to upgrade to Android 13 in the future, then I would go with the Moto G Play because it does have pretty much all that. On the other hand though, if you like to use tap and pay, then the Cricket Icon 4 might be a better choice because honestly this is a pretty big advantage if you do use tap and pay, because in this price range, there are really very few phones that actually have NFC, so definitely something to keep in mind. But again, aside from this, if you are looking for a really basic device for more light basic use, I do think either phone is going to be a great affordable option. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalibis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.